and welcome to Capacity Middle East Reconnect. You've tuned into our next episode for this year's agenda. Panel Smart Thinking, How Smart Cities Can Create a Whole New Society. We're looking forward to seeing some of you in Dubai on the 18th to 19th of May. You can book your place for the in-person event by heading to our website. But in the 9 weeks between now and then, you can tune into weekly content episodes right here on Swapcard. We're delivering a range of topics over the next few weeks, including e-gaming, peering, subsea, and content delivery in the region. Go and check out our full program to see what we have planned. We'll get started in just a minute, but first I would like to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors, in particular Platinum sponsors Airtel and Sparkle at this year's Capacity Middle East Reconnect. You can interact with the companies you see here by heading to their virtual booths and by setting up a meeting for when this year's virtual meetings start on the 16th of May. Informal networking between delegates will be available from the 4th of May. If you have any questions about this year's event, please reach out to one of the Capacity Media team. And with that, I'll hand you over to our moderator for this esteemed panel session, Carl Roberts. Carl, over to you.
Thanks very much, David, and welcome everybody to this exciting session on smart cities. Smart cities are going to play a very important part of our future. In 2026, it's supposed to be a $98 billion business. And around the world, there's over 250 smart city projects already underway in 178 cities. So an awful lot going on. By 2050, 70% of the world's population are going to live in cities. So this poses lots of challenges, but huge amount of opportunity, but it's all built around technology, which is why I'm delighted to have a terrific panel here today with Munir, Hani, Mohammed, and Craig, who will come at this subject from many different angles. But I'll let them introduce themselves now. So let's start with Munir. Over to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Munir Zoudi. I work for Nokia Bell Labs. I'm a partner for Middle East and Africa region. Bell Labs obviously has been around for more than 90 years, and they've been a global innovation engine behind so many different innovations, from the creation of the transistors to the lasers, Unix, C++ programming languages, so many different innovations. And within Bell Labs, we have the Bell Labs Consulting, where we work with different clients, service providers, cities, enterprises, and help them in their transformation journeys to digitize their operation, including obviously the transformation journey for cities to become a smart and cognitive cities.
Okay, thank you, Munir. Hani, over to you.
Hello, Carl and the entire Capacity team. Thank you for having me here. I'm Hani Ali. I am the Middle East Venture Partner for Matchmaker Ventures. And simply what we do is we bring together innovation with experience, right? We bring together innovation coming from high-tech, high-growth companies which are ready to be scaled up. They're proven with proven propositions. And we match them with corporates who are looking to innovate in the different areas of business. And prior to that, I was the EVP for Do, and Smart Cities, today's topic, was a big part of my portfolio.
Great, thank you, Hani. Mohammed.
Thank you, Carl. Hello, everyone. Mohammed Adnan Ratmi, based in Dubai. I work for Orange Group, and more specifically for Orange Business Services. I'm in charge of what we call the regional domains and regional business units of the portfolio of Orange Business Services across the core portfolio, the core business on the network side and the voice side, and also on the strategic business around the cloud, the IT, and also security. We have developed some specific know-how here within the region when it comes to smart cities across the region. I will be happy to share this with all of you during this panel session and with the rest of the team. And thank you again, Carl, for the invitation.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. And Craig.
Thank you very much, Carl. My name is Craig Price. I've been in the IT and telecommunications industry for over 30 years, probably on par with Carl. And over the last 15 years, I've been dealing with a number of smart city projects including some implementation of smart city projects, not just in Hong Kong where I'm based, but also in China, and hopefully we'll get onto that. Interestingly enough, my current role is Senior Vice President for Mobility Products and Marketing. So effectively now I'm actually looking at the enabling technologies for smart cities. So I'm very much focused on IoT services, 5G, the benefits of 5G in terms of smart cities and generally, and also the various technologies that need to be put in place to enable effectively smart cities and other smart things to occur. So I think I've been particularly blessed in my career in dealing with these particular topics, and I look forward to this panel discussion. Thank you, Carl.
Thanks very much, Craig, and we'll certainly get into that because 5G in particular, but also the move to edge. Everything's going to be at the edge somewhere in a city, so that's going to be very intriguing, and we'll definitely get into that. Just to kick things off, though, a more ethereal question, but very important nonetheless, is how important is it to have a clear vision for a smart city? And maybe, Munir, could I ask you to give a view on that to start us off?
Yeah, so the short answer is that it's extremely important. So you cannot have really a smart city project unless they are part of a bigger vision to transform the entire city and all the services to become more smart, more focused towards the citizens and the residents and the visitors, and to be able to align everyone, all the different stakeholders on the focus areas and the priorities. And the vision must come from the top, and the people should be really the focal area in that vision. So, I mean, you see a lot of examples about that, and here, locally for us, in Dubai, when the Smart Dubai initiative was launched, and now with Vision 2040, you see, next door in Saudi, for the Vision 2030, the presentation for NEOM, the line. So really the vision came from the top. And then after that, you have to have the proper governance in there to implement it. And one popular title that you see now in so many cities is, you see like Chief Technology Officer, Chief Information Officer, Innovation Officer, Sustainability Officer, Digital Officer, right? So this have become almost like part of a leadership, team for the city to make sure that you take that vision and you translate it into a strategy and into a plan that you can implement it. And then, part of that vision also, you need to make sure that you have proper regulatory framework to make sure that you can facilitate and expedite all the initiatives that you want in the implementation for the different use cases in Smart City.
Thanks, Munir. And that actually yields another question. You mentioned regulatory, right? Do you think that there needs to be a change in regulatory regimes to deal with these smart city environments, or do you think that the current regimes in place can handle it?
Absolutely, there needs to be a change, because if you look at regulatory authority historically, they were just maybe focused on the voice service, right? What's legal, what's illegal, and then it becomes more into data and the data security, and then the data ownership, and then hacking. So even those things, some of those questions are still not fully answered. So when you go and you throw in, blockchain and AI and all the different maybe ethical questions that you might have so many different opinions and all that, so obviously you have to kind of transform that whole framework and to make sure that the regulations are not really part of the challenges. They're not really obstacles in there that will slow down the implementation for smart city services. And you want to make sure that you keep up, because the technology is changing at a very, very high speed, at an accelerated speed. Sometimes it's very hard to keep up. And usually governments are always kind of a little bit behind the industries. So you want to make sure that you keep up with there and even stay ahead, and make sure that you pave up the way, put the right framework in there to facilitate all the different services that you need to introduce.
Okay, no, absolutely agree 100%.
And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes you need to put the right balance. I mean, there's one nice analogy that I heard is that, regulation sometimes it's like when you drive a car, you have to keep the right balance between the gas pedal and the brake, right? Putting too much gas is not good. Putting the brake too much while you're driving also is not good, right? So you need to find the right balance in there.
And especially not having your foot on the brake and on the accelerator at the same time.
That would be the worst.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So a question for Hani then. Hani, look, there's so many actors that participate in building a smart city or a smart district solution. But who do you feel should take the lead here? Because obviously you have a planning vision, which will come from the authorities, and a vision for society, which is the kind of top line goal. But then ultimately it translates into what technology partners can do. So how evidently it needs to be collaborative, but who should lead in your view? Should it be the people with the vision or the people who can say this is what you can do? What's your view on that?
Well, actually, to answer this question, I need to comment just quickly on the first question. You mentioned that there's 150 smart city
250.
projects around 250 around the globe, and these projects are not. Most of them, I assume, are not in greenfield sites. These are in brownfield sites. Cities, yeah, cities which are already there. And these cities are in places which have different geographies, different cultures, different traditions, and so it's very important to be clear on the purpose for which the project is being done. And there's no one cookie cutter approach, right? Different cities will have different objectives and therefore different purposes. And it's very important to be clear on what that is, because that ensures success and ensures then the proper collaboration, which you're just mentioning now in your second question. And the answer is not really, there is no black and white answer. It really depends on which city and which area and which geography and which culture. If you're doing a smart city in the US, somewhere in California, it's going to be different than here in Dubai or in Saudi. Um, um, but it is a collaboration, and it's a continuous conversation between different stakeholders. Who owns or leads that partner ecosystem, I think, is still up for grabs. It could be telcos, it could be system integrators, it could be managed service providers, it could be, it could come from innovators that drive innovations across the entire ecosystem. Of course, government is orchestrating all of this, and here we touch about the rule of regulation. But if we put government aside, I think it's still up for grabs between these different players. Telcos, maybe energy providers, system integrators, innovators, different parties. And I still think we're going to get clarity on that going into the future. I think here in Dubai, the model which was used was very clear, right? We had the government here in Dubai was very clear about what it wanted to achieve. We had very clear role, for example, for the telco operators who were acting as overall system integrators, and under them came different technology providers. That's one model. Another model, I think, which you can see in other countries, is where you have people who are innovating in the field of energy or technology, who are driving more and being more proactive about this change.
Munir, I know you've been involved in a number of initiatives. So, what kind of takeaways have you had in your experiences?
So in general, if you say takeaway, I mean, obviously each smart city deployment has its own unique characteristics, right? Because each city has a unique DNA and unique challenges and maybe different approaches for the implementation. So maybe no two cities are alike. But what I can tell you is that some of the takeaways is that there's one false perception that smart city is only meant for rich cities, which is not correct, right? So when you talk sometimes to some customers in Africa, they feel that, hey, this smart city is for richer cities in the Gulf area, in Europe, in the US, but it's not really for us. But one extremely important element of smartness is really the sustainability. And that's why ITU, about 6 years ago, they changed the definition from smart city to smart sustainable cities, right? So sustainability is extremely important for all cities, and especially for countries in Africa and maybe some countries in Asia, right? To make sure that the resources that you have, which are limited in the city, can match the future growth and the future demand that you expect. And then, I mean, we talked, a little bit about that has to be, the vision has to be from the top. We talked about the regulatory framework. It has to be focused on people. It cannot be technology driven. You cannot just take the technology and say, okay, what can I do with it? What kind of use cases I can provide? You really have to focus first on your unique challenges in your local markets. And sometimes actually you get a fortunate stroke of serendipity where, you target one use case and then you find that there are some other benefits. So one example I can give you in Chicago, where they wanted to go into smart lighting, and then they found that actually by having better lit areas, they were able to drop the rate of crimes, right? Because they found that there's some kind of correlation between how dark is the area and that. So sometimes you find some benefits like that. We all saw the benefits of automation in the COVID era when we went into remote everything, right? So cities who invested in digitizing and automating and all that, they were able to grab the benefits in this, unforeseen circumstances. One also learning I can tell you is that a lot of times, people go after some vertical approaches. So they go to address one unique challenge, but they don't look at the big picture. They don't start with the vision. And that makes it, costly, that makes it lengthy, it becomes slow, it becomes operational nightmare. And that approach obviously doesn't really scale. So you always have to kind of have a horizontal approach in there. And you need to make sure that you build the city, the smart city initiatives right the first time, because it will be very hard for you to go back and change into it. So, I mean, these are maybe some of the things that I can mention to you based on different initiatives. And then also one key thing maybe I can add here is that smart city is not really a destination, it's a journey. So it's not like, you go with a certain formula and you try to achieve it and you say, okay, I'm set now, my city is smart. It's really a continuous evolution. We already see now some people say smart city 1.0, 2.0. Some people say now, we're going from smart city into cognitive city, into future city, into conscious city. So you see this kind of ongoing evolution. So that's why it's important to kind of build it right the first time and make sure that you have the proper ecosystem to turn the city into an innovation hub and innovation platform to continuously make an improvement and introduce new use cases that will address the challenges not only today but also in the future.
I know OBS has been involved in a lot of smart city or smart district initiatives in the region. So how did you find it from an OBS perspective? Because obviously you've worked on Silicon Oasis here in Dubai, but also on a number in KSA. So how did the collaboration work there, and what were some takeaways from that?
I will start first by saying the smart city ecosystem itself is complex. If you look at whatever definitions about smart city, you're talking about bringing technology, government, society, citizens to provide smart economy, smart mobility, smart environment, smart transport. When you drop all these names, means that we are talking about a very, very complex ecosystem. And not aligning all this ecosystem in the right manner will be waste of time and waste of money. And I agree with the Dr. Munir. If we do it wrong at the beginning, it will be difficult to catch up later on or to upscale during the journey. So first, we have the city stakeholders. They define the planning of the project and so on, and also the funding, which is really an important topic. So we may start, and at the middle of the journey, we find that we don't have enough fund to complete and deliver all our vision. Second part of the ecosystem are the real estate organization, the architects, the building contractors, construction companies. They have a great role to play. Sometimes even the end customer are giving the money of the smartness to those people to manage on their behalf, which makes the ecosystem a bit complex. There are also the people who will be operating all these assets later on and using them in an efficient manner. And there is also the technology part, which you were referring to, which is also a complex one, because when we talk about smart city, we're talking about a technology-powered type of entity that includes telecom companies, vendors of hardware, of software, manufacturers of devices, and so on. But the key element here, coming back to what Hani answered earlier on, we really need someone on the technology side to federate all these people. We call it the Master Digital Integrator within Orange Business Services. And this is, to be honest with you, our bread and butter within the region. We are the single interface to the customer, hiding for him the complexity and offering for him an end-to-end service on the build and also on the run. Because those people that we're dealing with are not really experts in technologies. They can't talk to you about user journey. They can talk to you about the pains they want to manage from business viewpoint. But having a master digital integrator, some people call it also MSI, master system integrator, is really a must to manage this technology journey from E to Z for the developers.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mohammed. That's super helpful. Now I want to come to Craig here with a kind of double-barreled question, because we've spoken about principles and people living better, etc., etc. So the double-barreled question is: so what are these applications that are going to make people's lives easier? And how they're being developed, what thought process, and then really tagging on to something Mohammed was saying about being the federator of all these initiatives. There are several schools of thought about the role of a carrier in all of this, which is everything from the master system integrator, which is where OBS is sitting, for other carriers who I'm not going to mention, say, okay, we're just going to deal with the connectivity plumbing and we're not going to get involved in the rest. So I'd like your view on the last point, but we're also very, very interested in what these applications that are being developed will actually do to help make living in a city better in the future.
Look, you've asked a very complex question, and I'll try to explain this. I mean, in terms of a smart city, you really need to look at layering the technology. The point was made by one of the speakers before that communication within the city is particularly important. So you need to establish the appropriate communication technology and services to enable those particular applications. We also then need to consider the computing power or the cloud services that need to go in to support that, and whether you go with a hyperscaler or you develop your own edge service for whatever particular application. Then you need to consider levels of security, and finally you get to your application. You mentioned before that there needs to be planning, and I agree you need to plan what sort of applications you have. And typically there are thousands of applications and thousands of use cases that you can look at with regard to a particular smart city. So planning allows you to narrow that down. And I suppose if we're looking at the hot applications that exist, certainly there's a lot of work being done with smart car and car safety. For instance, in Hong Kong, if you reduce the number of car accidents by somewhere in the vicinity of 50%, you actually remove the need for 3 hospitals. So you have these trade-offs that you have in regard to smart city services. We're also seeing health being driven quite significantly. COVID has put a large focus on health. It's put a lot of focus on people tracking. It's put a lot of focus on people management. So there's a lot of things that are being driven by certainly COVID. It was also mentioned about sustainability, energy utilization, how energy is used, and how that's implemented within a city is particularly important. So, and also. We also need to consider the development of applications for that particular city. And I think and that's a really interesting area, because one of the things we're dealing with in a city where we have a contractual joint venture with a city which is in China called Hangzhou, which is a city that's next to Macau and linked to Hong Kong by a very long bridge. And that's a greenfield city, and they're looking at actually being a sponsor for new applications and services. And what we discovered was that ultimately a lot of tailoring needed to be done for that particular city, even though it was even greenfield. And also we need to consider where that city wanted to go in terms of its overall planning. To cope with that, we actually partnered with a university. So we're actually now working with the city in terms of where its direction is and what it wants to achieve. a university to get access to some of the leading minds in terms of services and application development. We've actually set up effectively a smart city lab where we invite application providers in to work with the city and actually be part of this ecosystem. And we have actually centralized that into effectively a smart city office to actually drive that. So yes, there are generalized hot applications. Obviously, vehicles, one, reduce safety, sustainability, health are really key. But ultimately, these are long. This is a long year. These are long-term opportunities, long-term applications. So we need to consider the enablers. Then layering on top of that, an innovation center or innovation culture that is keyed into the city to ultimately deliver the applications the city will need, depending on its particular plans. I think that's a very complex answer to to the question, but essentially, when you have a smart city, it's a dynamic environment. It's an ever-changing environment, as pointed out by the other team members, the other panel members. And you need to put in place a innovation center or an innovation thought process to actually manage the outcome, not just next week, not just next year, but in a period of 5 to 10 years or even longer, if you're looking at massive city infrastructure development. So it's why your question was difficult, because I can't really give a specific answer to it, because the future is there to behold at some stage, depending on the policy direction of the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hani, I mean, you're working with a lot of startup companies, and I'm sure there'll be lots of people watching who have these kind of activities. The question would be, when an architecture will be open, because smart cities have to have open architecture, right? Surely this is a huge opportunity for smart folks, or intelligent folks with really neat, innovative applications to plug into that. So do you see this as one of the key vectors for future development of startups?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that what we're going to see is that as these projects progress, 250 projects, progress and become mature, you're going to see a lot of silos coming down between the different platforms which are out there, whether, these are network platforms or, CRM platforms or ERP platforms. You're going to see all of these silos, which we call now network platforms, CRM platforms, ERP platforms. I think these silos are going to basically come down, and you're going to have platforms which are talking to each other, and the definitions are going to be blurred. And I think this is going to be a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs and large corporates also, because regardless of what industry you're in, you're going to be able to basically look at other areas to increase your revenue, and you're going to look at other areas to differentiate versus your current offering. In the case of telcos, for example, we all know that telcos have an issue with declining ARPU, right?
Yeah.
So this is going to be huge space for them to increase their revenues, and at the same time, they can't do it alone. They will have to work with more innovative startups and scale-ups to make that happen. The same goes for the financial industry. What's happening in fintech? That's a big part of the smart cities of the future. Cashless transactions, everything done very quickly. And an example of the silos going down is telcos getting into the money transfer game with with wallets, with cash wallets, which are linked to your mobile number. We've seen a lot of success with this recently. You have with Vodafone, you have Vodafone Cash in Egypt. You have M-Pesa in Southern Africa. In Saudi, Western Union just acquired an equity stake in STC's money transfer business. So these are real life examples that the silos are coming down, and this creates a lot of opportunities, with open architecture, open APIs, for different startups in different areas to definitely grow their business.
And would you see carriers as getting more and more into becoming incubators for these applications, as opposed to being kind of arm's length partners, but actually putting money into developing these apps? Do you see that happening to a greater extent? Because it already does to a certain extent.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that they need to do more than one thing. I don't think one way is the answer. I think they need to incubate. I think they need to partner sometimes, and I think they need to acquire sometimes, and other times partner for scale up. I think there are four different routes to promoting innovation within large companies. One of them is acquisition, as you said. One of them is incubation. But in between these two, there's also a number of different variants. Like I said, corporate scale ups. And I think there's a lot of opportunities definitely in this area in the future. And I think we've seen already news coming from different operators in the region that they are pursuing this.
Yeah. Now, clearly, AI is going to play a key role in the future of smart cities, and that gets people excited and scared at the same time. So, what's your view on the role of AI, Munir, in smart cities going forward? And is it scary, or is it to be excited about?
Uh, Probably it's both, right? And it's not going to be limited to smart city because AI is expected to play a central role in pretty much every single vertical. It's really an integral part of what people call as the fourth industrial automation, right? Or fourth industrial revolution. Sorry. So smart city is really part of those verticals that are expected to be impacted by this fourth industrial revolution. And I think at some point you will not ask if a product or a solution has AI in it. I think it will be almost like integrated from the beginning in every product, whether you're talking about chips or you're talking about an end-to-end solution. So what you see even now, I mean, even when people talk about smart city, now people talk more about a cognitive city because now also AI is expected to be an integral part of any development for smart city solutions. So the importance of AI here in smart city is with all the insights that it will bring because we already have so much data that is generated from a city, from all the sensors that you have, the devices, the cameras, but most of the time, I mean, it's static. So what you need to do is you need to try to make sure that you do proper analytics on this data and drive enough intelligence to guide your decision making, to make sure that whatever products and services are really optimized and personalized to the residents and also to the visitors of the cities. And one recent example actually where we saw AI being leveraged is in fighting the pandemics, right? The COVID pandemics. So we saw AI being utilized to accelerate the development of the vaccines. We saw AI being utilized in the drones, in the robots that were going around, detecting if people are violating the lockdown restrictions, if people are not wearing face masks, to warn people. Some drones were utilized in the disinfection campaigns, right? So all this part of the automation that happened, to fight the pandemic is probably expected to be carried on and becomes maybe part of the application and the services that get introduced by cities. So maybe also like in the future, by leveraging AI, maybe you can try to predict the curve before it even takes shapes, right? To try to predict, some future events and to be able to make sure that you have the right mitigation strategy. But in general, all the applications will be really based on AI. Maybe top priorities will be given to public safety, to security. We see a lot of cameras, recording. So you do proper analytics on it. You'll be able to prevent accidents, which is, the use case that was mentioned earlier for the safety of roads, right? So you'll be able to predict the patterns that you have or establish certain patterns for the flow of people, for the flow of traffics that you have, and be able to detect any anomalies for people going the wrong direction or going into restricted areas or cars speeding. So a lot of different use cases that can be utilized really by feeding the data that you already have into an AI engine and try to establish a pattern and detect any anomalies in there. And then obviously, for security also, it's extremely important. So AI can be utilized also in security to be able to detect any anomalies in there in the traffic that you have, to see if there's any malicious traffic going there, any rogue devices in there. So a lot of different applications. Really, I mean, the sky is the limit. And like I said, people expect AI to be almost like the new electricity, that it will be really empowering pretty much everything that you see and touch, right? So it will be part of the digitization. But there are some questions, obviously, about the accuracy of AI, about maybe some of the ethical concerns. For example, when you go into autonomous cars, and you have to make some decisions in there. So there are certain things that are still being studied, and also goes back into the regulation challenges that we discussed earlier. So it's all kind of tie in together.
Yeah, and I guess there's the implication that when every solution is the fruit of multiple collaborations, when something goes wrong, like who's responsible? So those are things that need to be ironed out, which I'm sure we could spend 3 days on and not get to a conclusion here. But with everything in movement in smart cities are being tracked. Clearly, going to Craig here, mobile networks and IoT for sure is going to be a huge part of that. Um, how does that affect the dimensioning of networks and the management of the data, which you probably feed into an AI engine? Because it's going to be huge.
Yeah, I mean, even using the technology today, the amount of data that's collected in a smart city is huge, and that's being managed in the growth of data centers and others and cloud-based services that are actually supporting the city. I suppose what's interesting is really as the applications become more sophisticated and the amount of data grows, then the question is, what are the technologies that cities are looking for to actually manage that? Right? And I suppose the one of the core technologies that's emerging to support that, not just for governments but also for enterprises, is certainly 5G. Initially, 5G is being rolled out at 5G non-standalone, which means it uses the 4G core, and you get the benefit of the 5G radio to actually improve the speed. But that actually has a benefit to a city because that actually enables connectivity to areas that were actually too expensive to get to with fibre. So all of a sudden, you're getting the areas now with 5G, even in its very embryonic phase, where it can actually provide effectively wireless broadband services to areas that formerly didn't get wireless broadband services, which essentially makes the city somewhat smarter in terms of the ability to get information and collect information effectively from a wider and more ubiquitous source. But I think the exciting part about 5G is when it becomes standalone and you get all the benefits of 5G, where you start to get to network slicing, which will enable you to develop effectively communication services and technologies actually built for a particular application or a particular need. You get the benefits of low latency, which then brings in the concept of multi-edge access computing, which means you're bringing the cloud closer to customers, which will actually be drive a whole lot of new innovation in terms of the applications that can be delivered into the smart city. So, I mean, for example, I'm going to give you a strange example of a Coke vending machine, which is called a super vending machine that they're looking at implementing in Japan. Maybe not for a smart city, but it gives you an idea of what this stuff can do. So with this particular super vending machine, as you walk up to the vending machine, the vending machine actually analyzes you, looks at your features, your face, what sort of person you are. Are you middle aged? Are you younger? And it'll actually make a decision in terms of what product do I show you that I expect that you would like from me as a vending machine before you even reach the vending machine. So when you reach the vending machine, it actually proposes to you what sort of drink or food you actually want. Now, to supply that, you need some level of analytics in the machine. It has to do facial recognition. It then needs to determine what sort of person you are, and maybe even have artificial intelligence behind it to make that particular decision. So you take this vending machine who notices you and understands what to present to you, and you broaden that to a citywide scale where effectively these cities actually making decisions about you before you before you even know you're going to make that particular decision. And I think, and it's these underlying and technologies such as 5G will actually enable that and bring all those particular services together. The multi-edge access computing will enable the computing there closer to the individual. So I think all of this is quite exciting in terms of what these new technologies will lend to the city of the future. And I think the technologies we see today are really just the embryonic technologies for the services that these new technologies and new enabling technologies will bring to the cities of the future.
And of course, you could probably add in AR and VR into that because that already exists. So I'm sure there'll be applications that are suitably addressed by those technologies as well.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned AR and VR, but actually one of the more interesting services that's being provided is that it's being used already in the in the market, certainly in some of our tourist destinations in the UK. But actually, what I find interesting is as you bring your processing closer to the customer, you don't need as much processing in the end device. You can actually move that to the edge and reduce the cost of the edge device. So it's possible that in the future, our mobile phones will be 1/10 the cost because all the processing power is sitting in the edge. And essentially, you need a low-cost device to enable the services to be delivered to the individual. And it's these promises of technology and services that are really the power behind 5G and edge combined to deliver that into a smart city environment.
Now, in the smart city environment, with all of this data being gathered, there's nervousness by many people about what's happening to my personal data, etc. In fact, recently in Toronto, the city had embarked on a project with Sidewalk Labs, which is a subsidiary of Google, and this was a kind of part of Toronto being built from the internet upwards, as they said it. And they totally kind of turned that around and went more, let's make it a sustainable, more quote unquote fluffy place without all the cameras, without all the tracking and tracing. And certainly what we've seen in COVID times, that people have been resisting tracking and tracing apps, even for public health reasons. So to what extent is that going to be a problem going forward? Because evidently a lot of the benefits that you bring to smart cities will really derive from the fact that you can track, trace things, find out where the traffic is, if the train's late, how many seats on the bus, etc., etc. How have you dealt with that? Maybe for Craig and also for Mohammed, because you've worked on a number of these projects. How have you gone about addressing that when those concerns have been raised? I know, Mohammed, maybe I can...
Yeah, I can start and maybe Craig can complement it. This is really a hot topic, mainly in Europe, in US, and even here in the region, to be honest with you. So having the data in general outside of the region, outside of the country, is becoming first really challenging. So everyone is talking about data sovereignty. We need my data in the country, mainly the sensitive data about citizens, about the health of my citizens and everything. So which means we will see a huge number of infrastructure, IT infrastructure growing on country basis. Even the holistic cloud approach will reach some limitations when it comes to this private data. The second thing is about the mentality and the culture. This differs from one region to another. Not far than yesterday, I was watching the French news, and the speaker was talking about the resistance of the French people in adopting technology because those people, they don't like to be traced. Even though this will bring to them, for example, we're talking about the COVID, we're talking about safety, we're talking about protecting the health of people, but most of them were really resistant to have an application on the mobile that traced the movement of those people. So I'm just mentioning here an example. You can mention other example in other regions of the world where we will face the same the same problem. I don't know, Craig, if you are facing something similar in in UK or in other countries in Europe?
But actually, I think you made a very important point, Mohammed, that depending on the culture, the politics, and really the situation in regard to particular individuals. So if you're in China, facial recognition, track and trace, bad luck, it's going to be there, right? And there's no problem with implementing that. In Hong Kong, a little bit different. They encouraged track and trace by effectively ensuring that you couldn't go into a bar or a restaurant unless you actually said you were going into that bar or restaurant and put it on an application. So they sort of drove it in a less in your face sort of manner. But yes, in terms of tracking and tracing, there are cultures that won't adopt it all, and essentially only have a proportion of the population adopting it, even with some of the more benign applications. But ultimately, if you look at the UK example, I mean, CC cameras are everywhere, and ultimately they've been using the concept of reduction in crime and tracing of crime as a method to actually implement those services. So it'll all be very, very different. I'm sure America will be different to other countries in terms of the concept of freedom and how they adopt these particular services. But yes, adoption can occur. Adoption is going to follow the culture and the cultural norms that exist within that particular city or even that country, and essentially it needs to be factored into the smart city planning in terms of what needs to be done and how to actually implement that in what particular period of time and what problem it actually solves in that particular city. But it all has to be framed in a cultural environment because essentially a city is a culture, often its own particularly unique culture, and that needs to be thought through as you implement these new technologies.
Yeah, Hani, Munir, anything to add on that particular subject? Because it's a very, very hot button.
So, I mean, one thing I can say is that the first step could be really to use the data that you already have, right? So the city already, they have a lot of data. So before worrying about collecting new data and who would own it and all that, let's first start by making the best use of the things that you've already have. The second thing also, I mean, a lot of times people don't mind sharing the data if they see a benefit for that, right? And there are so many things that you can do even by anonymizing the data. So you don't have to really know who it belongs to, right? So there's an easy way for you to anonymize it. If you just want to look at the traffic flow, if there's any accidents. So there's a lot of things that can help you in running the city and making sure that you have, smart services introduced and all that without really using the personal data, but really just looking at the overall trends and all that. And some of this actually can all be processed at the edge. So it doesn't have to go all the way to the, to the central cloud and be stored there and all that, but can be processed at the edge, and it can really trigger an action based on the outcome that you would get in there. But I mean, this is a big topic, obviously, as you go into IoT, talking about, who owns what. Maybe this is also one of the excitement about technologies like blockchain, that, you will own your data, especially when you talk about, things in healthcare, that, for you, if you take an X-ray or you take a MRI, whatever it is, then you're the one who owns the data. You're the one who can assign who get to see what in there. But this is still kind of work in progress. But meanwhile, before you run, let's start walking. Let's go with what we have already, make the most out of it before we, look into new things.
Yeah, Hani?
Yeah, just one follow up on that. In addition to what Munir said, I think there's a big change in generation and how different generations think. I think maybe the new generations now really don't have this issue of data privacy. If you look at our children, whether they're teenagers or in college or they've graduated, their whole entire lives are on social media, whether through the different platforms. I think the whole idea of privacy, the meaning of privacy and what it entails, it really is different from generation to generation. And as these younger generations grow with smart cities, I think we're going to see a shift. But again, this is a topic for another huge discussion.
So if I can just have one comment based on what Hani said. So there was an experiment actually done by MIT, right? So the people who were developing, the technologies for blockchain and all that, they did an experiment and they found that the vast majority of the college students were willing to share their personal information for free pizza. And these are like, very smart kids, they attend MIT, but when they had the incentive that they can get, free pizza, in whatever form that they need to fill, they were willing to provide that information. So absolutely agree with Hani that the younger generation are more open to that. And you can just go on somebody's Facebook and Twitter just to know their entire story of their lives, right? So they're more open to sharing their information.
That's true. Sounds like we all need to invest in pizza parlors as well. Yeah. Now, evidently, smart city projects, especially when you think of projects like NEOM, which are, it's a 25-year project, that's much longer than the time horizons to realize revenue for operators, and yet operators have a big role to play in this. So one key question, I think, is how do you reconcile making a long-term commitment to such projects when the effort you put in, the commitment you put in, doesn't necessarily translate into realizable revenue streams in the short term? So what's the thinking around that? And should there be authorities who are building smart cities, especially greenfield ones, come up with some kind of economic model to address the short-term financials for all, whether it's the telecom operators or software companies or IT companies who are in the kind of build it before the population comes phase of building out smart cities. And this happened in the region a lot. I mean, years ago in Saudi it was King Abdullah Economic City. Now NEOM is there. So it's going to be a long time before NEOM has a big population, yet the infrastructures need to be in place. So maybe, Mohammed, could I ask you to have a shot at that?
I think this is a very important question. It's like everyone is ordering whatever he needs in terms of features, solutions, but who will pay at the end?
Yeah.
So we have seen more and more the type of PPP investment in the past years, and even a kind of strong requirement from people developing new districts, new cities, or whatever new thing, or even transforming a brownfield city and so on. So the PPP is emerging model because the government or the people developing such type of development are really looking to have the private sector being more and more involved for two things: the expertise on one side.
Yeah.
The private sector maybe have developed some solutions that could be of help to this project, and also for the finance. So, and this is back to your question, they want to share, I would say, the risk and the revenues in the future. So traditionally, we have been working in the past, during the past 10, 15 years on the traditional model. Mm-hmm. Government procurement agencies have preference to pay for what we call the design, build, operate, and maintain, which means they finance. We came like a partner to really design the solution, build, they will pay, and we will even operate and so on. But now, in the past few years, we have seen also the design, build, finance, operate model. We call it DBFOM, also that model, and recently the PPP. So really going in a new SPV, a new company between the private and the public to develop such type of development. So of course, this PPP engagement start really very early in the process. It's not in the RFP stage. It's really early discussions to see if the project we're talking about is bankable. The bank can loan you money to really go into these projects. Is this project something that we can deliver within the time frame that has been engaged or agreed with the master planning and so on? And of course, each one is looking at its own interest. The public sector is looking to have, exclusive concession with end user service based or based on delivery and performance. The private sector is looking also at the right regulatory framework. Yeah. Because am I allowed to sell these solutions? Is the regulatory framework exist? You mentioned an example of some future development. Such development, some of them, they don't have yet the regulatory framework to encourage people to invest. it's ongoing, it takes time, but this is the guarantee, for example, for the private sector to jump on. So, and once all these elements about bankability, can we deliver the project and so on, it can move from, I would say, an MOU stage to a PPP contractual stage, where this new, I would say, PPP entity can go to the market with RFPs because the financing has been really secured and so on. And as you mentioned, we have seen this more and more in the region here, in the GCC, in most of the the new greenfield projects, where the PPP element is really taking a huge part of the RFPs or of the questions that are engaged by the investors in this area.
Okay, that's great. Hani, anything to add to that particular point? Because I know you've worked on a lot in that area.
Well, we know that the foundation of smart cities is the network. Whether it's the 5G network, whether it's the next generation fiber networks, whether it's the IoT networks, and ultimately it is the operators who it's on the task of the shoulder of the operators to finance this network. The point, I think, is not about whether they will bear the cost or not, because I think operators will continue to bear the cost. I think it is how can they monetize this to ensure that they get good returns on their investment. And again, that goes back to the point which we were talking about earlier, which is, how can they break out of the normal silo mentality and enter into adjacent businesses, either through partnering with other players in industries, regardless of their size, or going down the route of innovation, incubation, acquisition. But I think that operators will continue to invest heavily in 5G and IoT and next generation networks, and these are this is the foundation of smart cities.
Okay, thanks, Hani. We spoke a lot about greenfield, but as we know, the majority is brownfield. How difficult is it to kind of drop a new district in an old city, thinking old city in Europe, and make it work with the existing infrastructure, and then propagate that at different points in time while maintaining a kind of holistic architecture? Because that's obviously a totally different scenario from starting afresh, where if you've got an overall design and a structure and an architecture that's modular, then you should be able to do it right. So I know, Craig, any thoughts of that from a brownfield perspective?
Yes, I'm looking. It's a very good question, and I don't know if it's really been resolved personally. If I look at Hong Kong, it's a brownfield city, effectively. So we're doing greenfield in China, which are wonderful. Trust me, greenfield versus brownfield. You want to do greenfield, but brownfield, you've got to consider the existing environment, the existing infrastructure, and also how you roll it out particular services across the city. I suppose in Hong Kong, they've actually broken the city into effectively not just smart city but smart districts. So they're really just focusing on particular districts and developing the services within that particular district, then deciding how then to roll out across the city. I suppose the interesting thing about a brownfield, at least the business case is easier than a greenfield, because you've already got existing environment. You know that particular environment, and you can actually build this business case up. But there's always the difficulties of the investment and the existing infrastructure and what's there. So I think the concept that Hong Kong has used of having us develop on a smart district basis is probably a good idea and effectively minimises the risk. But ultimately, it's the same issue that every brownfield city has to work through. The question is, the old joke is, how do you eat an elephant? The answer is one spoonful at a time. And really, that's something that each and every brownfield city has to go through and determine where the focus is, and then how to actually manage that focus and manage the risk in terms of rolling out these particular services.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the time's flown by, so that leaves me with one last question for everybody, double-barreled as I tend to do. So, Here's the double-barreled last question for each one of you for a quick answer. So, can any city afford not to have a smart city strategy at this point in time? And the second part of the question is, do you believe from everything you see that smart cities will actually deliver on their promises? Munir, let me start with you.
I think if one thing we learned from this COVID crisis is that smart city is no longer really a luxury; it's a necessity. So yeah, before we knew that the population is growing, there's a problem with environmental climate change, but now it's extremely important for us. So it really validated this, importance of accelerating the digital transformation all across all verticals, including smart city. So we definitely cannot afford to ignore that anymore. We have to kind of accelerate it. Will they deliver on their promise? I think it will be a journey. There will be some ups and downs, but in general, I mean, we really have no choice. We have to go on that journey, and in the long run, it will pay off.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Craig.
I agree with Munir. I said essentially, I think smart cities are not just a today's phenomenon. I think that over the centuries, cities have become smarter in different ways, whether it be this electrical system, whether it be sewerage, etc. So it's got to happen, and essentially, it's an issue of acceleration. How it'll be rolled out. I think that there's so many pressures now in terms of population, services, health, that it's inevitable. And really, unless the city does become smart, it'll start to wither and die, personally.
Okay, great. Thanks, Craig. Hani.
Well, I agree with Munir and Craig. I think they are here to stay, and I think the need has not only been proven by COVID, but also if you look at all of the emerging markets which have growing populations, it is the only way for them basically to sustain proper or to deliver a proper lifestyle for their citizens. Because if you look at countries like India or Egypt or Indonesia, which have rapidly growing populations, if a government wants to provide services physically, putting together government offices, and it's just almost impossible to do it for such a huge growing population. The only way to do it is to go smart and to go electronic and to go digital. So yes, COVID was a wake-up call, I think, for everyone in the developed world and in the developing world. But also, I would add, in addition to that, just it's just a very good business case in terms of a cost saving for the emerging markets. And so I think yes, with time it will deliver.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Hani and Mohammed.
Yeah, well, I agree with all what has been said in this area, mainly on we are no more talking about digital transformation after the COVID. We are talking about digital acceleration. And this is, of course, applicable to cities at 100%. Again, where I have not a different viewpoint, not everyone will go at the same pace, at the same speed. As Hani mentioned, we're talking about investment, we're talking about vision, we're talking about planning, we're talking about people to deliver this. So it will be different from one country to another, from one city to another, depending on all what has been discussed during this call, by the way. So, but it's becoming a necessity, not a luxury or something cherry on the top of the cake.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. So with that, we're timed out. Actually, we're a bit over, but I want to do two things before closing. First of all, I want to thank you all for a fantastic session. Really very dense, very interesting, lots of content, lots of insights. So thanks. I'm sure the audience will really appreciate it. And the message to the audience, if you've got any smart city projects, please talk to these gentlemen. They really know what they're doing. Thank you all. And with that, I'll hand you back to David. Hi, David.
Cheers. Thank you very much to all of our panelists and Carl as well for steering the conversation and your time and dedication for the panel session itself. I would once again like to thank all of our sponsors, including platinum sponsors Sparkle and Airtel, for their support for Capacity Middle East 2021 Reconnect. Please tune in to the following session as part of our additional content series, a one-on-one debate called How Carrier Interconnection Can Accelerate the Middle East's Role as a Global Hub, on Monday the 19th of April at 1 p.m. local Dubai time. The next panel feature session taking place will increase content consumption, encourage more effective collaboration, taking place at 2 p.m. at Dubai time, also Monday the 19th of April. All of our sessions will be made available on demand on Swapcard, so please remain on the agenda page to watch all of our previous sessions. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you back here on Swapcard next week.